According to the Financial Times, Iranian officials requested the Biden administration to broker a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. Now, to chat about this in more detail is the host of the Foreign Desk and our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, didn't both governments already meet privately back in January in Oman to discuss a potential ceasefire?
Yes, and on the sidelines, of course, Iran's regime, the puppeteer of all of this, making demands because they can. This was a meeting between a private meeting between the United States and Iran's regime, where the United States wanted to get the message to Tehran to please, pretty please, curb your proxies, stop shooting at us in the Red Sea, curb those Houthis. And instead, Iran turns around and says, no, you know what? Why don't you work on that ceasefire? And putting the pressure on the United States. And of course, you know, it just illustrates how far we've come in terms of emboldening this regime. Not only do they support Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and all these different proxies and insurgencies throughout the region, they're the ones telling the United States what to do and trying to control our foreign policy. If you look at a lot of the foreign policy that's coming out of the White House, it looks like they have actually have been listened to in a lot of ways. And most recently, another 10 billion released to Iran's regime, empowering them further, giving them the signal that the White House will listen to them, will loosen the sanctions, will, abide by what they want. And right now we have, we're in an election year, so it doesn't look like things are going to change anytime soon, only going to get worse in terms of appeasement of our enemies.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lashed out at the Biden administration, which suggested, at least perhaps, there needs to be a little bit of a regime change in Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "It is wrong to try to replace elected leaders of a sister democracy and a staunch American ally at any time, but especially during a time of war."
Right. And it's an interesting thing for the United States to now focus on Bibi Netanyahu as a right-wing candidate and to even bring in any sort of partisan politics right now. It is very, very wrong for anyone to assume that if anyone else was in office in the place of Bibi Netanyahu, left, right, or center, that they would react any differently to an existential threat like Hamas. October 8th, a major decision had to be made the day after the war began when Hamas attacked. And any leader in Israel, again, left, right, or center, and I'm not saying they're perfect, the right wing, left wing, they had their own domestic issues leading up to the war. But to believe that this existential threat and the war against rooting out Hamas would be treated any differently it's a false premise to begin with. Secondly, it looks as though the Biden White House has pivoted a bit to appease the progressives that are either in Congress, in office, or progressive voters, to now look at the election and say, well, we don't want to lose states like Michigan, for example, a major swing state here, but with a large population of Muslim voters that perhaps would believe that the Biden administration's policies are too pro-Israel, they favor Israel, our ally, too much, and are now trying to backstep a bit and trying to pivot and call on Bibi Netanyahu, for example. Like, his head has to roll in order for the United States to pivot their position to say, we're not so pro-Israel, but it was Bibi's fault that this happened to begin with. False premise. People in Israel don't believe this. They may have their own issues with Bibi, by the way, domestically, but when it comes to this war, the majority of Israelis believe that they have to root out Hamas. It's an existential threat. Their kids, their own safety, everyone's safety is on the line here. Israel's, the safety and security and future of Israel is on the line here. So I think that has to be pivoted a bit. The second thing I want to say is that to believe that these small concessions or a pivot in the policy or any sort of change in the Israel policy coming from the White House would appease those types of voters is absolutely wrong. When they're chanting from the river to the sea on streets in America, and I know that it's happening in Canada as well, that means a complete root out of the state of Israel, meaning Israel should be taken off the map. It does not mean that they want small concessions like the removal of Bibi Netanyahu or to scale back in Rafah. Those small movements or appeasement or concessions, whatever you want to call them, it's not going to work for these types of opinions.
We'll talk about the rise in anti-Semitism here in North America in just a few moments, Lisa. But in the meantime, leaders from Hamas, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad held a recent meeting in Beirut, and the talk centered on aligning efforts for the continuation of fighting the Israeli military in Gaza.
Right. And one of the narratives that has been lost throughout the last few months since October 7th was the Wall Street Journal expose that actually underscored the fact that more than one terror organization met with Iran's regime before October 7th was launched. And they agreed upon aligning their efforts, exactly what this meeting wanted to double down on, to say that we will attack Israel from all fronts. And to believe, again, that any one of these groups is better than the other, that will be the future of the Palestinian people. Again, very, very naive to believe that could be the case. Iran is funding multiple terror groups in the region. They want them all. They want all guns pointing towards Israel, and they are doing so in a very quick way. Again, very much reflective of the policies here in the West that are not stopping them from moving forward. The fact that the Houthis are shooting at all carriers coming through the Red Sea, the fact that you have insurgencies inside Syria and Iraq and Hezbollah in Lebanon, everyone is moving in because they see that this is a ripe moment in order to attack, again, Israel, who is our ally, but a weakened Israel because of the attacks and because of the lack of support coming from the White House.
Let's talk about the other war that Israel is dealing with right now. You touched on it a little bit earlier, and that's the war in the north against Hezbollah, which keeps firing rockets on the Jewish state. Lisa, how is the Iron Dome holding up so far to protect Israelis?
The Iron Dome has been a blessing and a curse in the sense that it has been obviously more than a blessing, I should say, than anything else, and I want to backtrack on that, because missiles are coming into Israel daily. Even before October 7th, the Iron Dome was doing its duty in order to keep civilians safe from random, indiscriminate rockets coming into civilian areas. So obviously it's doing its job. The reason I say it's a bit of a curse is because it also has been a bit of a blind spot in combating more new and more outside of the box types of threats that have come up from Hezbollah, from Hamas. Look, it's very daunting to fight an enemy that is working 24/7 for your destruction, for your genocide, to destroy you, your state, and your people forever throughout the world. And because of that, they go back to the drawing board. And Israel, as much as it has its technologies and its innovations and all of that, they go back to life as usual. So I think October 7th was a bit of a wake-up call. The Iron Dome is absolutely helpful. But when you look at these tunnel systems, for example, in Gaza, the fact that Hamas has been working so quietly, stealthily on these tunnel systems, the sophistication, the depth, the breadth of these tunnels, it just goes to show that you can catch them in the air, but what are you going to do underground? It just goes to show how dedicated they are to their terrorism. It's this new world meets old world. So it's the old terrorism, of jihad and wanting to kill and wanting to murder Jews, but at the same time meeting these new technologies that they have developed. And again, a whole world underground. And of course, Hezbollah being the next front has been very calculating, of course, those directives coming from Iran's regime as to how often to attack Israel, with what, how to escalate this. And it looks like they will be entering into another war. It's just a matter of what that timing will be, again, dictated by Iran's regime.
Let's talk about anti-Semitism, the elephant in the room here in North America, Lisa. We've seen instances and attacks in Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, and in Toronto. Police in Toronto have responded to 989 hate crime calls since October 7th. That's a 93% increase compared to a year ago. And there have been 84 hate crimes alone since January, with 56% being anti-Semitic in nature. Many are angry at what they're calling a genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Now, there's a report that a 50-year-old man, Scott Hannaford, has been arrested for allegedly burning down a Fort Lauderdale, Florida Jewish community center. So not just here in Canada, but in the United States as well.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of this, whether it's on college campuses, they're beating people up. I mean, it's become very, very violent attacks. This is just premise, right? What does a college student getting beat up, or a Chabad center, a Jewish center in Florida, being burned to the ground with the rabbi's car being set on fire as well, have to do with any sort of dispute over land that goes back to biblical times in the Middle East? It's really just an excuse, a premise to kill Jews, to, of course, express their anti-Semitism at a time when these emotions are so heightened. We're seeing a lot of it on social media being promoted by a lot of influencers who have millions and millions of followers who are blindly, advocating for either boycott of things of that Jewish-owned businesses, or advocating just for anti-Semitism and violence, and to attack Jewish students, and to attack Jewish, politicians, and to go after any business that's owned by Jews. There was a deli or cafe in New York City this morning. I saw they wrote, line starts here if you want to support genocide, and the neighbors came out and started scrubbing the ground along with the owner of the deli. It's horrific. It's horrific. It's anti-West. It's anti-American. It's anti-Canadian. It's anti-human. I mean, there's no reason for this. This wouldn't be accepted against any other race, religion, creed, across the board. So I think that, as we always say, the first they come for the Jews and then for everyone else. So I don't think any one of us should sit and bear witness to this without calling it out. I also think that there has to be a better job coming from the top. When the White House, for example, pivots on its position against Bibi, that does promote more anti-Semitism. It gives that kind of okay to say, oh, well, it is the Jews. It was their fault. And I think there needs to be a better job. And when Kamala Harris comes out to talk about anti-Semitism and first mentions Islamophobia, of course, nobody wants Islamophobia. Nobody wants racism. Nobody wants anti-Semitism. But when there's an issue, we have to talk about it. Just like everyone would get upset when we would say all lives matter, not just Black lives matter, because at that moment, the issue was against African Americans. Right now, the issue is against the Jewish community. And we all, as a global community, need to unite behind them and to say, enough is enough. I don't think this is something that will go away with this war. I think it's here to stay, especially if it's not rooted out. It's going to be something that's going to become completely normalized, unfortunately.
Lisa, Russian President Vladimir Putin won the federal election in his country with a record 87% of the vote. He's already led Russia for 24 years. Was there ever any doubt?
Right. Another 6 years in the books for Putin. Look, of course, I had people writing me on Twitter because of the headlines we were posting and saying, don't call it an election. And so I put the, election in the single quote because, of course, he is a dictator. He's, an anarchist, however you want to look at it. But I will say one thing that perhaps is not on the radar of most. A lot of Russians have rallied behind Putin in his invasion of Ukraine, and that has given him some more clout at home, where before there was less, because of the economy, because of a lot of different domestic issues back in Russia, because of the crackdowns, etc. This may be an increase in his popularity, but also it's hard to tell because this is always rigged, and of course he was going to be issue, and regardless. So we shall see. I think this is going to be an important couple of years for Putin, for Russia, for the discussion around what role will Russia play on the global stage, and what do they want after Ukraine? I mean, let's say that we do give him an off-ramp on Ukraine, or there is some sort of ceasefire that is meaningful and long-lasting within that war. What will be next for Putin? And I think that that's a big question that a lot of people are not talking about.
Now, speaking of elections, yours is coming up this November. It'll be Biden against Trump once again, the rematch. How much of an impact on the Trump campaign will all of his court cases really have?
I think once they're done with, it doesn't look like, on the one hand, right now, it looks like, a lot of those who stand behind him staunchly stand behind him. They think that the court cases are bogus. They think a lot of the pressure and the media is bogus because they just want to target Trump. So for those who are his core constituents, it won't matter at all. For moderate voters, I think we'll have to see how the Biden campaign shapes up. Look, his State of the Union, he came out very strong in terms of energy. I don't know if he had a bunch of Red Bull or espressos or what he did, but he came out very energetic to kind of, quash those, the talk of him being senile and not having the energy and not having the capacity. Of course, there's that's a fact. I mean, his age, the fact that he has made so many mistakes and continues to, and they will question his capability to serve another 4 years. Look, if Biden can show up with energy and to say, I am capable of another 4 years, all he has to do is say Trump is nuts and crazy and look at all these lawsuits and look at all these issues. And I think a lot of the moderate voters may be apprehensive about putting their support behind Trump. So we shall see. I think what's up for grabs here is obviously women voters, moderate voters, minority voters who may be on the fence about either candidate, really. I think it's going to be, for a lot of people, this will be voting for the worst of two evils. So we shall see how each camp shapes up and whether it actually will be Biden versus Trump once we get to November.
No, exactly. We only have a few short moments left here, Lisa, but I wanted to talk to you about the Princess of Wales, Kate Middleton. A new sighting for Kate Middleton, the first since her abdominal surgery in January. There's been a lot of conspiracy floating around as to why we haven't seen her.
Right. We haven't seen her. We don't really know the full story, which leads people on social media who are obsessed with the royals to come up with their own pictures and their own narratives and their own timelines and just leave her alone. Look, many people would disagree with me and say, you can't leave them alone. They're in the spotlight. They're royals. They should give people more information. They should give them more and more and more so that they can kind of stop with all the conspiracies. But it looks as though she came out to go to the local market. There aren't any pictures, by the way, of that outing, but there was a supposed outing and people saw, there were witnesses. So people want pictures, people want information so that the tabloids don't go on making their own assumptions. But it looks as though she had her surgery in mid-January and she won't be in the public eye or serving in her position until after Easter. So we have a couple weeks until we see what really happened. If people can just be, kind of assuaged by the narrative that comes out after Easter. So let's just give them a couple weeks.
Exactly. She's our royal family and foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Thanks so much for joining us once again from Los Angeles.
Of course. Thank you for having me.